I am Edward, 67 years old, and until recently I was living in the dream villa I designed and built in Malibu 20 years ago. After losing my beloved Margaret to cancer 14 months ago, after 40 years of marriage, I thought nothing could hurt more. I was wrong. I never thought my own flesh and blood would look me in the eyes and tell me I wasn't welcome in my own home. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to follow my journey through betrayal and what I did about it. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Boston, I learned early on that nothing worthwhile comes easily. My father worked double shifts at the factory, while my mother took in sewing to help us make ends meet. Despite our limited means, they instilled in me a powerful work ethic and the belief that with determination, anything was possible. That determination carried me through high school, where I discovered my passion for architecture. I would spend hours sketching buildings, imagining spaces where people would live their lives, create memories, and find sanctuary. When I earned a partial scholarship to study architecture at university, it was the proudest day of my parents' lives. College was challenging, but transformative. I worked nights at a local diner to cover expenses, often studying until dawn after my shift ended. It was during my sophomore year in a crowded university library that I first saw Margaret. She was studying art history, her auburn hair falling across her face as she concentrated on a thick textbook about Renaissance painters. I pretended to need the same reference book she was using, and our hands touched, reaching for it. That single moment changed my life forever. Margaret was everything I wasn't: cultured, well-traveled, and from a comfortable background. But somehow she saw something in the ambitious, rough-around-the-edges architecture student. Our courtship was simple: walks through campus coffee dates where we'd talk for hours, and occasional splurges on concert tickets when I'd saved enough from my diner job. We married the summer after graduation in a small ceremony with just our families and closest friends. Margaret's parents gifted us enough for a modest down payment on our first apartment, a tiny place in Boston, where we began building our life together. I joined a small architecture firm, while Margaret taught art at a local high school. Those early years were lean, but beautiful. We furnished our home with second-hand finds that Margaret would restore and transform. I would draft building plans at our kitchen table, late into the night working on side projects while climbing the ranks at my firm. We were building something together: a life, a future, a legacy. 7 years into our marriage, Stephanie was born. The moment I held my daughter, something shifted in me. Suddenly, all my ambitions had a focal point. I wanted to create a world of beauty and opportunity for this perfect little human. Margaret and I agreed that whatever sacrifices were needed, Stephanie would have the best of everything we could provide. As Stephanie grew, so did my career. By her 10th birthday, I had become a partner in the firm, specializing in luxury residential properties. We moved to a larger home in a better neighborhood, and Margaret was able to pursue her art full-time. Stephanie blossomed into a bright, curious child who shared my fascination with buildings and her mother's creative spirit. My relationship with Stephanie was special. On weekends, I would take her to construction sites, explaining the process of how homes came together. She would listen intently, asking questions that sometimes surprised me with their insight. For her 13th birthday, I built her a treehouse in our backyard, and we spent countless evenings there as she navigated the turbulent teenage years, sharing secrets and dreams under the stars. Throughout these years, I was designing other people's dream homes while nurturing my own vision. I kept a sketchbook filled with ideas for the perfect house, one that would encapsulate everything Margaret, Stephanie, and I valued. A home that would be our sanctuary and legacy. When Stephanie left for college, Margaret and I decided it was time. We had saved diligently, and my reputation in architectural circles had grown. We sold our Boston home and moved temporarily to a rental in California, while I began the most important project of my career, our Malibu villa. The design process took a full year. Every detail was considered, from the way morning light would filter into the kitchen, where Margaret would have her coffee, to the acoustics in the living room, where she could play her beloved piano. I designed a studio space with north-facing windows where Margaret could paint, and a library with built-in window seats where Stephanie could read during her visits home. The construction itself took another 2 years. I was on site daily, working alongside the builders, insisting on perfection in every joint and seam. Margaret and I would visit in the evenings, walking through the skeletal structure, imagining our future there. One particularly meaningful day, we mixed our handprints into the foundation concrete, a private symbol of how our love was the bedrock of this home. Finally, 20 years ago, we moved in. The villa exceeded even my meticulous expectations. Perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, it was a masterpiece of glass, stone, and warm wood. 3 bedrooms each with its own view of the ocean. A kitchen designed for Margaret's love of cooking. A terrace where we would have breakfast watching dolphins play in the distance. Most importantly, it felt like us, a physical manifestation of our journey together. The years in that house were the happiest of our lives. Stephanie would visit during holidays from college, and later when she began her career in marketing in Los Angeles. We hosted countless dinner parties, celebrated anniversaries, and weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, within those walls I had built. When Margaret was diagnosed with breast cancer 6 years ago, the house became her healing space, filled with sunlight and the sound of waves to comfort her through treatment. We thought she had beaten it. For 5 years, Margaret thrived, returning to her art with renewed passion. Then, 14 months ago, the cancer returned aggressive and unforgiving. Within 3 months, she was gone. The loss of Margaret left me adrift in the home we had shared. Every corner held memories. Her coffee cup I couldn't bring myself to move from the kitchen counter, her paintbrushes still arranged in her studio, her scent lingering in our closet. The house was both comfort and torture, a testament to what we had built and what I had lost. Stephanie was my lifeline during those dark months. She would drive down from Los Angeles every weekend, bringing groceries, handling paperwork, and simply sitting with me as I grieved. We would walk the beach below the house, and I would tell stories about her mother, determined that Margaret's memory would remain vibrant between us. In those moments, despite my profound loss, I felt grateful for the daughter we had raised, compassionate, responsible, and strong. I had no idea how quickly everything was about to change, or that the home I built with such love would become the center of a betrayal I never saw coming. 8 months ago, Stephanie called me bubbling with excitement. She had been invited to a charity gala in Beverly Hills and wanted my advice on what to wear. I suggested the blue dress Margaret had bought her for her college graduation, knowing it would make her feel like her mother was with her that night. She called again the next day, her voice different, animated in a way I hadn't heard since before Margaret's illness. "Dad, I met someone," she said, and proceeded to tell me about James Anderson. The Andersons, as I would soon learn, were old-money real estate developers with properties across Southern California. James was their only son, Harvard-educated, and working in the family business. According to Stephanie, he was charming, ambitious, and had swept her off her feet with his attention at the gala. Their first date was at a Michelin-starred restaurant I could never have afforded, even at the height of my career. Their second was a private helicopter tour of wine country. By the 3rd week, James was sending a car service to bring Stephanie to his Bel Air mansion for dinner parties with important connections. "He moves in circles I never knew existed, Dad." Stephanie told me during one of her increasingly rare visits. Yesterday, I met a senator and a film producer at his parents' tennis club. I was happy to see the renewed light in my daughter's eyes, but something about the speed and intensity of this relationship unsettled me. When she brought James to the villa for dinner 1 month into their relationship, my concerns deepened. James Anderson was objectively handsome, tall, with perfectly coiffed dark hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He surveyed my home with the calculating gaze of someone assessing property value rather than appreciating a personal space. His compliments felt rehearsed, his questions about my career perfunctory. Throughout dinner, his phone buzzed constantly with messages he claimed couldn't wait. "Your home has character," he said in a tone that made it clear this wasn't a compliment. "Of course, the location is spectacular. This bluff must be worth millions by itself." Stephanie didn't seem to notice his condescension, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm in a way that spoke of intense infatuation. When I brought out photo albums to show James pictures of Stephanie growing up, she quickly diverted the conversation to their recent yacht trip to Catalina. After they left, I sat alone on the terrace, watching the moon over the ocean, and feeling a strange sense of foreboding. Margaret would have seen through James immediately. She had an uncanny ability to read people's true intentions. Without her by my side, I second-guessed my own judgment. Perhaps I was being unfair to James, viewing him through the lens of a protective father rather than giving him a genuine chance. 3 months after they met, Stephanie arrived at my door unannounced, a massive diamond glittering on her left hand. She and James were engaged with a wedding planned for just 2 months later. "Isn't it all happening very fast?" I asked gently, pouring her a glass of wine in the kitchen, where we'd had so many heart-to-hearts over the years. "When you know," she replied with a certainty that echoed her mother. "James says at our age there's no reason to wait. We're thinking about starting a family right away." I swallowed my reservations and hugged my daughter, promising her my support. If James made her happy, I would make every effort to welcome him into our family. The next phase of their relationship brought me into the orbit of Franklin and Diana Anderson, James's parents. Our first meeting was at an engagement dinner at their Beverly Hills estate, a coldly impressive mansion with museum-worthy art and staff who moved silently through the rooms, anticipating needs before they were expressed. Franklin Anderson had the firm handshake and direct gaze of someone accustomed to getting his way in every situation. Diana's smile was practiced perfection, her assessment of me barely disguised as she took in my off-the-rack suit and unfashionable watch. "Edward designs homes," Stephanie explained, with a hint of apology that had never been in her voice when describing my work before. "Custom residential." "How quaint," Diana replied. "We're primarily in commercial development and luxury multi-unit properties. Much better return on investment." Throughout the evening, the conversation revolved around the Andersons' connections, their recent acquisition of a shopping complex in Newport Beach, and their vacation home in Aspen. Whenever Stephanie attempted to share stories of her childhood or our family traditions, Diana would smoothly redirect the conversation. "Stephanie tells us you live in Malibu," Franklin said to me over brandy after the women had moved to the sitting room. "Beachfront, on the bluff with beach access," I replied. "I designed and built it 20 years ago." "Smart investment," he nodded. "Those properties have appreciated tremendously. James mentioned it's quite unique in its design. Not everyone's taste, of course, but land value alone in that area is significant." I felt a chill at his assessment, recognizing that he viewed my beloved home as nothing more than a real estate opportunity. I changed the subject, asking about his and Diana's family background, trying to understand the people who would be my daughter's in-laws. The wedding was an extravagant affair at the Andersons' country club, With 400 guests, most of whom were the Andersons' business connections and social circle, Stephanie and I were decidedly outnumbered. I had offered to contribute to the wedding costs, but James had firmly declined. My parents would be offended, he explained. In our circle, the groom's family handles everything. I felt increasingly sidelined during the planning process. Stephanie and I had once talked about her wedding day, imagining a celebration in the garden of our Malibu home, with Margaret's favorite flowers and music that held meaning for our family. Instead, Diana had engaged a top wedding planner who executed a fashionable but impersonal event. My role was reduced to walking Stephanie down the aisle and giving a toast that the wedding planner asked me to keep under 3 minutes, please. As I stood to speak at the reception, looking out at a sea of unfamiliar faces, I felt Margaret's absence acutely. She should have been there, helping our daughter navigate this important transition with her wisdom and warmth. Stephanie and James left for a month-long honeymoon touring European capitals. During their absence, I threw myself into volunteering with a veterans housing project, trying to fill the growing silence in my life. Stephanie's calls became less frequent, her texts briefer. When they returned, they settled into James's Bel Air home, and our weekly visits dwindled to monthly, then sporadically. "We're just so busy, Dad," Stephanie would explain when canceling dinner plans. "James has this huge development project in San Diego, and I'm helping with the marketing strategy." I noted that she had stopped pursuing her own marketing career to support her husband's business, but kept my concerns to myself. When they did visit, James would invariably receive urgent calls that required their early departure. Stephanie began arriving alone more often, but even then she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. Her conversations filled with references to the Andersons' social obligations and business ventures. The daughter who had once shared everything with me, from her teenage crushes to her career aspirations, was becoming a stranger, adopting the values and priorities of her new family with a speed that left me disoriented. I tried to maintain our connection, sending her articles I thought would interest her, inviting her for our traditional Sunday brunches, suggesting we visit Margaret's favorite art museum, as we had done regularly before. "That's sweet, Dad," she would say, "but I have a charity committee meeting this weekend," or "James's parents are expecting us at their club." 6 months into their marriage, I realized I had seen my daughter only 5 times, always in rushed visits, that left me feeling more alone than before she came. The transformation in Stephanie was subtle but unmistakable, from her new designer wardrobe to her adoption of Diana's dismissive phrases and social judgments. She was becoming an Anderson, and in the process, the connection to her roots was fraying in ways that filled me with quiet dread. I was about to discover just how complete that transformation had become. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon when Stephanie and James arrived unannounced at my door. I was in the garden tending to Margaret's roses, a weekend ritual I had maintained since her passing. Seeing my daughter's car pull into the driveway brought an immediate smile to my face. Spontaneous visits had become rare, and I treasured any time with her. "What a wonderful surprise," I said, embracing Stephanie as they approached. She returned my hug stiffly, pulling away quicker than usual. James stood slightly behind her, hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks, sunglasses hiding his eyes despite the shade of the garden trellis. "We need to talk about something important, Dad," Stephanie said, her voice carrying a formality that set off warning bells in my mind. "Can we go inside?" In the living room, the one I had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows to capture the ocean panorama. They sat together on the sofa while I took Margaret's favorite armchair. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until James cleared his throat. "Edward," he began, using my first name as he always did, despite my initial request that he call me Dad. Stephanie and I have been discussing your living situation. My living situation, I repeated, genuinely confused. This house, Stephanie interjected, gesturing around. It's so big for just one person, Dad. All this upkeep, the expense of maintaining it. I manage fine, I assured her, still not understanding where this was leading. The house is paid for and I have my pension. The garden keeps me busy, and I've been consulting on a few small projects to keep my mind sharp. James leaned forward, removing his sunglasses to reveal eyes calculating and cold. Edward, what Stephanie is trying to say is that we think it would make sense for you to consider downsizing. A condo, perhaps something more manageable at your age. At my age, I echoed, a hint of indignation creeping into my voice. I'm 67, not 97. This home is my life's work, my greatest professional achievement. And it's also a significant asset, James continued smoothly. One that's currently underutilized. The Anderson family is looking to expand our Malibu portfolio, and this property would be a perfect addition. The true purpose of their visit hit me with the force of a physical blow. They wanted my house, not out of concern for my well-being, but as a real estate acquisition. I looked at my daughter, hoping to see some sign of discomfort or hesitation, but her expression remained resolute. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. We want you to sign the house over to us. Stephanie said the words tumbling out, as if she'd rehearsed them. James and his father have looked at comparable properties, and they're prepared to offer you a fair price, enough for you to buy something comfortable and have money left over. I sat in stunned silence, memories flooding through me. I remembered the day we broke ground on this house, Margaret and I, toasting with champagne on the empty lot. I remembered carrying Stephanie across the threshold the first time she visited, after construction was complete, her gasp of delight at the view from her bedroom window. I remembered Margaret's last days, how she had asked to be moved to the sunroom so she could watch the sunset over the ocean. This isn't just property to me, I finally said, my voice low. Every inch of this house holds memories of your mother, of our family. I designed it for us, built it with my own hands in many places. It's not for sale, especially not as a portfolio addition. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I understand sentimentality, Edward, but you need to be practical. You're getting older. This place has stairs, isolated location. It's not safe for someone living alone. Dad? Stephanie added, her voice softening in a way that reminded me painfully of how she used to wheedle for extra allowance as a teenager. Think about it. You could be closer to me in the city. We could see each other more often. The irony of this statement wasn't lost on me, given how rarely she made the hour's drive to visit now. I stood up, walking to the large windows that framed the coastline. Do you remember when we poured the foundation? I asked Stephanie quietly. You and your mother were with me. We put our handprints in the wet concrete under what would become the hearth. Said it was our way of making the house truly ours, built on our love. Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. Dad, that's exactly what I mean. You're too attached to this place. It's not healthy to live surrounded by memories. The memories are what keep me going, I replied honestly. And this discussion is premature. I have no intention of selling this house. When I'm gone, it will be yours as your mother and I always planned. But that day is not today. James stood abruptly, his cordial facade cracking. I think you're being short-sighted, Edward. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. The market fluctuates, and frankly, the house needs updating to reach its full value potential. Then I suggest you look for another property to add to your portfolio, I said firmly. This one is not available. The tension in the room was palpable as they prepared to leave. Stephanie hugged me at the door, whispering, Just think about it, Dad. For me. But the plea lacked sincerity, and as I watched them drive away, I felt a profound sense of betrayal. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house in darkness, running my hands along the walls I had designed, remembering the joy each space had held. In our bedroom, still our bedroom in my mind, though Margaret was gone, I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since her funeral, I wept openly. Not just for my loss of her, but for the daughter we seemed to be losing to greed and influence. What did we do wrong, Margaret? I whispered to the empty room. How did we raise a child who could value property over family? There was no answer except the sound of waves breaking against the shore below. But somehow in the quiet aftermath of my tears, I found a resolve that had been missing since Margaret's death. This house was our legacy, and I would not surrender it to become another acquisition in the Anderson portfolio. 2 weeks passed without a word from Stephanie. I called her several times, leaving voicemails that started concerned and gradually became more hurt as days passed without response. I even drove to their Bel Air home one afternoon, only to be told by a housekeeper that Mr. and Mrs. Anderson are not receiving visitors today. Mrs. Anderson. My daughter had taken James's name, of course, but hearing the housekeeper refer to her that way drove home how completely she had been absorbed into his world. When my phone finally chimed with a text from Stephanie, my heart leapt with relief. Need to talk. Coming over tomorrow. 2 p.m. I spent the morning cooking her favorite meal, my lasagna with Margaret's secret sauce recipe. I set the dining room table with Margaret's good china, placed fresh flowers from the garden as a centerpiece, and even opened a bottle of the red wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. Perhaps breaking bread together would remind Stephanie of our family bonds, help us find our way back to the relationship we once had. At precisely 200 years, I heard her car on the gravel driveway. Through the front window, I watched her emerge alone, her posture tense. She wore a designer suit I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back in a severe style that aged her. This wasn't my Stephanie coming for a family meal. This was an Anderson on business. Still, I greeted her with a warm embrace she barely returned. "I've made lasagna," I said hopefully. "Your favorite." "I can't stay long," she replied, walking past me into the living room without removing her jacket. "James has a meeting at 4, and I need to be back." I followed her disappointment settling in my chest. "Stephanie, we need to talk about what happened. You can't just drop a bombshell, like wanting to buy my house and then disappear for 2 weeks. She turned to face me, arms crossed defensively. "That's why I'm here, Dad, to follow up on our proposal." "It's not a proposal I'm interested in," I said firmly. "This is my home, your childhood home, the place your mother and I built for our family." Stephanie sighed, a sound so reminiscent of Diana Anderson that it momentarily startled me. "I was hoping you'd had time to consider the practical aspects, but there's something else you should know." She paused, seeming to steel herself. "James's parents are looking to retire from active management of their properties." "What does that have to do with my home?" I asked, though a sick feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. "They think your house would be perfect for their retirement. The location, the view. They've always wanted a personal residence in Malibu." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about adding a property to the Anderson business portfolio. This was about taking my home for James's parents. "Let me understand," I said slowly. "You want me to give up the home I designed and built where your mother and I raised you, where she spent her final days, so your in-laws can have a nice retirement view. It's not like that," Stephanie protested, though her eyes couldn't meet mine. "Franklin and Diana have been incredibly welcoming to me. They've introduced me to people who've advanced my career, included me in their family traditions. This would be a way to repay their generosity. By giving them my home." I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "Stephanie, listen to yourself. What would your mother say if she heard you now?" At the mention of Margaret, Stephanie's expression hardened. "Mom would want me to be happy, to secure my future. The Andersons are influential people, Dad. This alliance means everything to my future with James." "Alliance," I echoed. "You make it sound like a medieval political marriage, not a loving partnership." "In their world, it's both," she replied with surprising candor. "And I need to prove my value to the family." The implications of her statement stunned me into silence. My daughter was trying to buy her way into her in-laws' approval with my home. "I'm sorry," I finally said, "but the answer is still no. This house is not for sale. Not to James, not to his parents, not to anyone." Stephanie's facade of professional detachment cracked, revealing a flash of the temper she'd inherited from Margaret. "Then you leave us no choice. Either sign it over willingly, or they'll contest Mom's will." "Contest what will?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Your mother and I owned this house jointly. Upon her death, it transferred fully to me as all our assets did. Their attorneys say there are grounds to challenge that. Something about improper filing or unclear intentions." Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "Franklin has connections with judges throughout Southern California. Do you really want to fight this in court at your age, with your resources against theirs?" The threat landed like a physical blow, not because I feared its legal merit. Margaret and I had been meticulous in our estate planning, but because my own daughter was threatening me with litigation on behalf of her new family. "I never thought I'd see the day when you would threaten your own father," I said quietly. "What happened to the compassionate, ethical young woman we raised?" "I grew up, Dad. I realized that in this world, you need power and connections to be secure. The Andersons can give me that." Her voice softened slightly. "You're being selfish. You don't need all this space. A condo would be so much more manageable for you." "Selfish," I repeated, anger finally breaking through my shock. "I designed this home for our family. I maintained it all these years to leave it to you someday, as your inheritance, not as a bargaining chip with your in-laws. Every decision your mother and I made was with your future in mind." "Then think of my future now," Stephanie snapped. "This house is worth millions that are just sitting here while you rattle around alone. The Andersons can use this property to solidify their position in Malibu development. My position in the family depends on making this happen." "And what about your position as my daughter?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Does that mean anything anymore?" The question hung in the air between us. For a brief moment, I saw conflict in Stephanie's eyes, a flicker of the daughter I knew. Then her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and the moment was gone. "I need to go," she said, gathering her purse. "Think about what I said, Dad. The Andersons don't lose. Ever. It would be better for everyone if you cooperated." "Better for the Andersons, perhaps," I replied. "Not for me, and not for the memory of what this house meant to our family." Stephanie paused at the door, looking back at the untouched dining table with its careful arrangements. Something like regret crossed her face, but she squared her shoulders and said, "I'll be in touch about next steps," before walking out. After she left, I sat alone at the table, the lasagna growing cold, the wine untouched. The threat of legal action didn't frighten me as much as the realization that Stephanie was willing to go to such lengths. She had chosen her side, and it wasn't with me. With hands that trembled slightly, I picked up the phone and called Thomas, my oldest friend, and a retired attorney who had helped Margaret and me with our estate planning. "Thomas," I said when he answered, "I need your advice. It seems I'm about to go to war with my daughter." 3 days after Stephanie's ultimatum, a luxury SUV and a sleek sports car pulled into my driveway. From my home office window, I watched Stephanie and James emerge from the sports car, followed by an older couple from the SUV, who could only be Franklin and Diana Anderson. Their unannounced arrival was clearly meant to catch me off guard, a power play straight from Franklin's business tactics. I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt, and went to meet them at the door. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. What a surprise, I said pleasantly as I opened the door before they could ring the bell. I wasn't expecting company today. Edward, Franklin Anderson extended his hand with the confidence of a man unused to rejection. We thought it was time we discussed this property situation directly. May we come in? I noted his phrasing, this property situation, rather than your home, but stepped aside to allow them entry. Diana Anderson glided past me, her critical gaze sweeping the foyer. Interesting architectural choices, she murmured in a tone that made it clear she found them lacking. Very personal. That was the intention, I replied evenly. A home should reflect those who live in it. Don't you think? I led them to the living room where they arranged themselves like visitors to a museum they were considering acquiring, which I supposed wasn't far from the truth. Stephanie perched on the edge of the sofa beside James, avoiding my eyes. Edward, Franklin began without preamble. I believe in directness in business matters. Stephanie has conveyed our interest in this property, and I understand you have reservations. It's not a matter of reservations, I corrected him. I have no interest in selling my home. Franklin waved his hand, as if my statement were a minor technicality. Everyone has a price. I'm prepared to make you a very fair offer. And he removed an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the coffee table between us. This represents what we believe to be the current market value, with a small premium for the expedited and private nature of the transaction. I didn't touch the envelope. Mr. Anderson, with all due respect, this house isn't on the market. Dad, Stephanie interjected, at least look at the offer before dismissing it. To appease her, I opened the envelope. The figure on the document inside was substantial, but significantly below what Thomas had told me was the property's true value. More importantly, no amount could compensate for what this house meant to me. This is considerably below market value, I observed, returning the paper to the envelope. Franklin's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The house requires significant updating to reach full market potential. We're accounting for necessary renovations. As if on cue, Diana stood and began wandering the room, running her finger along surfaces and making small noises of disapproval. The kitchen will need a complete overhaul. These countertops are hopelessly dated, and these windows, so impractical for energy efficiency. I watched in silent disbelief as she proceeded to mentally demolish the home Margaret and I had created with such care. She moved through to the dining room where I heard her say, "This space is all wrong. We could take down this wall, open it up to the terrace." Mrs. Anderson, I called out, my patience wearing thin. I appreciate your interest in interior design, but as I've made clear, this house is not available for your renovation plans. Franklin stood, moving to stand beside me with the false camaraderie of a salesman. Edward, let me be frank. At your age, managing a property of this size is impractical. Stairs become hazardous. Maintenance becomes burdensome. Our offer allows you to move somewhere more appropriate while ensuring this house goes to family. The Andersons are not my family, I said quietly, but I am. Stephanie interjected, finally meeting my gaze. And by extension, so are they. We're offering you a solution that benefits everyone. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing her face. The Stephanie I raised would never have participated in this ambush, never would have stood by while her in-laws dismantled the home she grew up treasuring. I've consulted with my attorney, I said, addressing everyone in the room. My ownership of this property is legally uncontestable. Margaret and I ensured all our affairs were in order before her passing. Franklin's genial mask slipped slightly. Attorneys can find grounds to contest almost anything, Edward. Prolonged legal battles are expensive and stressful, particularly for someone in your circumstances. The threat was thinly veiled, but before I could respond, Stephanie stepped forward with a folder of her own. We've filed paperwork already, Dad. Our attorney says we have a strong case, since Mom didn't leave a formal will specifically addressing the house. Your mother and I had a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, I replied calmly, thanking Thomas silently for refreshing my memory on these terms. The property transferred to me automatically upon her death. There was no need for specific provisions in a will. Stephanie's confident expression faltered, but James quickly placed a hand on her shoulder. Technicalities can be challenged, he said smoothly. Why put yourself through that stress? Diana returned from her unauthorized tour of my home, positioning herself beside Franklin like royalty addressing a subject. We've made our decision. This home is perfect for our needs, with the right modifications. Franklin has an excellent construction team ready to begin work immediately. The decision isn't yours to make, I reminded her, amazed at her presumption. Dad, Stephanie said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. You need to be reasonable. This happening. You can make it easy or difficult, but the outcome will be the same. Then she delivered the words that would forever change our relationship. This is theirs. Now you are not allowed to come. You have 2 weeks to move out. The room fell silent. In my daughter's eyes, I saw not malice, but something perhaps worse, indifference to the pain she was causing me. She had made her choice, casting her lot, with the wealth and influence of the Andersons over the love and history she shared with Mob. I smiled and nodded a response that clearly surprised them. I understand, I said quietly. You'll cooperate? Franklin asked, suspicion evident in his tone. I understand where things stand now, I clarified. You've made your positions clear, as have I. If there's nothing else to discuss, I have matters to attend to this afternoon. James smirked, interpreting my calm as capitulation. He whispered something to Stephanie, who relaxed visibly, believing they had won. We'll have the final paperwork drawn up, Franklin said, reaching for a handshake I did not return. Our team will be in touch to arrange the transition. As they filed out, Stephanie lingered briefly at the door. This is for the best, Dad, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. You'll see. I already do see, Stephanie, I replied softly, more clearly than you can imagine. After they left, I stood alone in the suddenly quiet house. The weight of what had just occurred threatened to crush me. My own daughter had not just betrayed me. She had delivered an eviction notice from my own home. I moved to Margaret's piano, running my fingers lightly over the keys she once played. They think they've won, I whispered, as if she could hear me. But they've forgotten something important. I pulled out my phone and dialed Thomas again. They came, I told him without preamble. All of them. Made threats, claims about contesting ownership, gave me 2 weeks to vacate. Thomas's voice was steady, reassuring. Edward, remember what we discussed. They're bluffing about the legal grounds, but there's something else I discovered when reviewing your property documents. As he spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. I had designed and built this house. I knew every inch of it, every legal document associated with it, every modification and addition over the years. I built this, I said when Thomas finished. And if they want it so badly, I'll make sure they get exactly what they deserve. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Andersons had awakened something in me that had been dormant, a fighter's spirit, a determination not to be dismissed or discounted because of my age or solitary status. I would not be leaving my home in 2 weeks, but I would be preparing a welcome they would never forget. With renewed energy, I threw myself into action. Thomas had reminded me of something crucial, something the Andersons in their arrogance had overlooked. My first stop was the county records office, where I requested copies of all documents related to my property. As I suspected, the original survey and deed contained information that would prove invaluable. When Margaret and I purchased the land 20 years ago, we actually acquired 2 adjacent lots that had been previously owned by the same family, while we built the main house on the larger parcel. Lot A, the second parcel. Lot B contained the driveway entrance, the infinity pool, and most importantly, the private beach access path, elements that made the property particularly desirable to the Andersons. The 2 lots had never been officially combined into a single parcel. For convenience and tax purposes, we had maintained them as separate entities while developing them as one cohesive property. This distinction had seemed a minor technical detail over the years, but now it represented my strongest leverage. From the records office, I went directly to my attorney's office. Thomas had retired from full practice, but he'd connected me with Sarah Chen, a sharp real estate attorney, with experience handling complex property disputes among wealthy families. "The Andersons are used to intimidating people into compliance," Sarah observed after reviewing my documents. "They're counting on you being too emotional or too intimidated to fight back effectively." "They've miscalculated," I replied. "This home is all I have left of the life Margaret and I built. I won't surrender it without using every legal resource available." Together, we mapped out a strategy. While the Andersons might attempt to force a sale of the main house through dubious legal challenges, they had no claim whatsoever to Lot B. And without Lot B, the property lost much of its appeal and value. "We should also review Margaret's will thoroughly," Sarah suggested. "You mentioned she made specific provisions for certain items in the home. Indeed, Margaret had been meticulous in documenting her wishes. Her formally filed will specified that while the property would transfer to me certain custom fixtures she had commissioned, the stained glass panels in the master bathroom, the hand-carved newel posts on the main staircase, the mosaic tile work in the kitchen, were specifically bequeathed to me personally, not as part of the real estate. These are technically personal property, not fixtures attached to the real estate," Sarah explained. "You have every right to remove them before any transfer of ownership." Armed with legal clarity, I next contacted Jordan Williams, my former assistant, who had gone on to establish his own architectural practice. Over lunch at a seaside cafe far from my home, I explained the situation. "Those vultures," Jordan said, shaking his head in disgust. "Using your daughter like that. It's unconscionable." "I need your professional assessment," I told him. "As an independent architect familiar with the property, I want documentation of all the custom elements I designed personally, particularly those that would require specialized knowledge to replace or repair." Jordan agreed immediately, arranging to visit the house the following day under the guise of consulting on a project. His detailed report would provide crucial evidence of the home's unique architectural elements that would be extremely costly to replace without my cooperation. My next step was contacting the neighbors. Over the years, Margaret and I had maintained friendly relations with the families on either side of our property. The Nakamuras to the north and the Wilsons to the south had been there nearly as long as we had, and both families had attended Margaret's funeral. I invited them for coffee separately, explaining the situation frankly. Both expressed outrage at how I was being treated. "Those developers have been trying to get footholds in this area for years," Robert Wilson, a retired judge, told me. "They approach everyone with offers, then get nasty when rejected." More importantly, both neighbors confirmed they would sign affidavits testifying to the improvements Margaret and I had made to both lots over the years, and to the clear understanding in the neighborhood that the beach access path on Lot B was exclusively mine. With my legal position solidified, I turned to practical matters. I rented a secure storage unit and began carefully documenting and packing Margaret's art collection family heirlooms and the custom fixtures specified in her will. Each item was photographed in its original position, carefully removed, and transported to storage by a bonded moving company that specialized in handling valuable art and antiques. Next, I contacted a trusted contractor who had worked with me on several projects over the years. Under my supervision, he disconnected and capped the irrigation system that served both lots, documented the complex electrical wiring I had personally designed for the property's lighting system, and created detailed records of the custom HVAC system that required specialized maintenance. Throughout this process, I maintained a cordial but distant text communication with Stephanie. When she inquired about my moving plans, I responded vaguely that I was making arrangements and sorting through possessions. This seemed to satisfy her, as the Andersons were preoccupied with planning the renovations they intended to begin immediately after taking possession. 2 days before their self-imposed deadline, I made one final strategic move. I contacted Alex Rivera, my neighbor on the adjacent property beyond Lot B, who had been trying to secure beach access rights for years. We negotiated a limited easement agreement that would allow his family controlled access across a small corner of Lot B for a substantial annual fee. The agreement was quickly drawn up, notarized, and filed with the county before the Andersons could have any inkling of my actions. The last piece of my preparation was finding temporary housing for myself. Rather than the small condo the Andersons had suggested, I leased a comfortable beach cottage about a mile down the coast, close enough to monitor what was happening at my property, but removed enough to give me peace during the coming confrontation. On the evening before the Andersons' move-in day, I walked through my home one last time. I touched the walls I had designed, stood in the spaces where Margaret and I had shared our lives, and said a temporary goodbye to the home I had no intention of surrendering permanently. In the master bedroom, I placed a framed photo of Margaret on the otherwise empty dresser, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. "They think this is the end," I whispered to her image, "but it's only the beginning." I slept that night in the cottage, surprisingly peaceful, despite the confrontation I knew was coming. For the first time since Margaret's illness, I felt fully awake and engaged with life, driven by a purpose that transcended my grief. The Andersons had intended to dismiss me as an irrelevant old man. They were about to discover just how mistaken they were. Moving day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Southern California morning that had made this location so desirable. From the vantage point of a small rise on the public beach, I watched as a convoy of vehicles turned into my driveway. The Andersons' luxury cars followed by 2 large moving trucks and a van marked with the logo of an interior design firm. I allowed them 20 minutes to assemble before making my appearance. Timing was crucial to the impact I wanted to create. When I finally walked up the driveway wearing a crisp button-down shirt and carrying a leather portfolio, I found exactly the scene I had anticipated. Franklin and Diana Anderson stood on the terrace, gesturing expansively as they directed a team of movers and designers. James was on his phone, pacing by the pool. Stephanie stood slightly apart, her expression unreadable as she watched workers begin unloading furniture from the trucks. "Good morning," I called out pleasantly, causing all activity to cease momentarily. "I see you're right on schedule." Franklin recovered quickly from his surprise, striding toward me with false joviality. "Edward, we weren't expecting you. Everything's under control here. No need for you to oversee the transition. Must be difficult for you." "Not at all," I replied with a smile. "In fact, I wanted to personally welcome you to your new acquisition and provide you with some important information." I patted the portfolio under my arm. "A welcome package, if you will." James approached, suspicion evident in his stance. "We assumed you'd already cleared out." "I've removed my personal possessions, yes," I confirmed. "But as the architect and builder of this property, I felt obligated to share some critical details about your purchase." Stephanie finally moved closer, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Being a responsible seller," I replied mildly. "Shall we sit down?" "What I have to discuss affects all of you." Reluctantly, they followed me to the terrace table, which was already scattered with renovation plans and fabric swatches. Diana snapped her fingers at a hovering designer, who quickly cleared the surface. I opened my portfolio and laid out several documents, taking my time to arrange them precisely. The Andersons exchanged impatient glances, but none dared rush me. "First," I began, "I wanted to provide you with copies of Margaret's properly executed and filed will, which my attorney discovered you never actually reviewed before making your claims." I slid the document toward Franklin. "You'll note on page 3 that she specifically left all real property jointly owned by us to me exclusively upon her death." Franklin barely glanced at it. "Paperwork can be challenged." "Indeed," I agreed pleasantly. "Which brings me to the second item." I placed a survey map on the table. "This is the original property survey. You'll notice it clearly shows 2 separate parcels, Lot A and Lot B." For the first time, I saw uncertainty in Franklin's expression. "What's your point?" "My point is that while you've been focused on acquiring the main house which sits on Lot A, you've overlooked a crucial detail. Lot B, which includes the driveway you just drove up on the infinity pool where James is standing, and the private beach access path, is a separate legal parcel." Diana leaned forward, her perfectly maintained composure slipping. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I continued calmly, "that even if you succeed in forcing the sale of the main house through your dubious legal tactics, you have no claim whatsoever to Lot B, which I have retained full ownership of and have no intention of selling." The implication sank in slowly. Then, all at once, without access to Lot B, the main house became effectively landlocked, with no direct access to the road or the beach. James swore under his breath. "This is a bluff. The properties have been treated as one unit for decades." "Treated as one, yes, but legally distinct," I corrected him, sliding forward another document. "Here's the property tax assessment showing they've always been taxed as separate parcels." Franklin's face had reddened. "This changes nothing. We'll simply purchase Lot B as well." "I'm afraid it's not for sale," I replied. "In fact, I've already sold a limited beach access easement across Lot B to the Riveras next door. The agreement was filed with the county yesterday." Stephanie stared at me finally, beginning to comprehend what I had done. "Dad, you can't do this." "I already have," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But there's more you should know before you proceed with your moving trucks." I laid out the next document, a detailed inventory of the house's custom fixtures. "Margaret's will specifically bequeathed these items to me personally, not as part of the real estate. As you can see, I've already removed them, as is my legal right." Diana gasped as she scanned the list. "The stained glass in the master bath. The hand-carved staircase details. Those are integral to the house. They were personal artistic commissions, not structural elements," I explained. "Quite valuable, too. You'll need to factor in replacement costs for your renovation budget." James was now pacing again, his phone forgotten in his hand. "This is ridiculous. We'll challenge all of this in court." "You're welcome to try," I agreed. "Though you should also review this report from the county building inspector." I presented another document. "It seems the previous owner of Lot A, that would be me, filed a complaint about potential code violations that would need to be addressed by any new owner before occupancy permits can be issued. The inspection is scheduled for next week." Franklin's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. "You reported violations on your own house. I merely requested a thorough inspection to ensure everything is up to current code for the new owners," I said innocently. "Safety first. And there's the matter of the property taxes. I continued, presenting a final document. "They're due next week. As you can see, based on your purchase offer, the property has been reassessed at a significantly higher value, nearly tripling the tax burden." The color drained from Diana's face as she examined the numbers. "This is highway robbery." "It's actually just market value assessment," I corrected her. "Something your own real estate company advocates for regularly, I believe." I stood up, gathering my remaining documents. "One last thing. I've taken the liberty of transferring all utilities to your names effective immediately. The custom smart home system requires specialized maintenance. The manual was one of Margaret's personal items, I'm afraid. And the utility companies required significant deposits due to the property's unusually high consumption patterns." I closed my portfolio with a satisfying snap. "Welcome to your new home. I wish you all the happiness it brought Margaret and me for 20 years. The tableau before me was everything I had hoped for. Franklin looked apoplectic. Diana shell-shocked. James was already on the phone, presumably with their attorney. But it was Stephanie's expression that affected me most. A dawning horror as she realized the scale of what her betrayal had cost not just me, but her new family. "Dad," she whispered, "what have you done? What you taught me to do," I replied softly. "Protect myself in a world where family can become business overnight." I nodded politely to the Andersons. "I'll leave you to your moving decisions. My attorney's contact information is in the folder, should you have any questions." As I walked away, I heard the chaos erupting behind me. Diana berating the designers about wasted fees, James shouting into his phone, Franklin barking orders to stop the movers. I didn't look back. The sound was confirmation enough that my message had been received. In the months that followed, events unfolded largely as I had anticipated. The Andersons attempted legal challenges, but withdrew them when their attorneys confirmed the strength of my position. They tried unsuccessfully to sell the main house, but without the accompanying amenities of Lot B, found no buyers willing to meet their price. 6 months after that confrontation, I was settled in my coastal cottage, which I had grown to enjoy for its simplicity and tranquility. I had begun sketching designs for a new modest home that reflected this chapter of my life, smaller, but no less thoughtfully crafted. My phone rang one afternoon as I was working on these drawings. Franklin Anderson's name appeared on the screen, a call I had been expecting eventually. "Edward," he began without preamble, his voice lacking its former confidence. "We need to discuss the property situation." "I'm listening," I replied. "We want out," he admitted bluntly. "The carrying costs are untenable, and without access to Lot B, the property isn't viable for our needs. We're prepared to sell back Lot A to you at a loss just to be done with this fiasco." I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. "I'm sorry to hear it hasn't worked out for you, Franklin. I'll have my attorney review any offer you'd like to submit." After hanging up, I returned to my sketching, feeling a sense of closure beginning to form. The house would return to me, though I wasn't certain I would live there again. Too many memories, too much pain associated with Stephanie's betrayal. A week later, there was a knock at my cottage door. When I opened it, Stephanie stood there alone, looking nothing like the polished Anderson wife who had evicted me from my home. Her hair was pulled back simply, her face free of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweater I recognized from her pre-Anderson days. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let her in, noting the absence of her wedding ring. We sat across from each other at my small kitchen table, the ocean visible through the window behind her. "James and I are separating," she said after a long silence. "After the house disaster, his parents blamed me, said I should have known about the property complications. Things fell apart quickly after that." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I was so wrong, she whispered, tears forming. I got caught up in their world, their values. I thought wealth and connections would make me secure important. I threw away everything that actually mattered. Including our relationship, I noted quietly. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, Dad. What I did was unforgivable, but I needed you to know that I see it now. What I became, what I almost destroyed. The person who tried to take your home, that wasn't me, or at least not who I want to be. We talked for hours that afternoon, painful truths laid bare between us. The reconciliation would not be quick or easy. Trust, once shattered, could not be instantly restored. But it was a beginning. In the end, I did repurchase the main house from the Andersons at a price that ensured they would remember the lesson in humility for years to come. But I didn't move back in. Instead, I donated the entire property, both lots, to a foundation that would transform it into a retreat for artists and architects, with a special program for widows and widowers healing through creative expression. Margaret would have loved that legacy far more than any family possession. Stephanie and I began rebuilding our relationship, slowly meeting weekly for the Sunday brunches that had once been our tradition. She found a new job on her own. Merritt's rented a simple apartment in Santa Monica and started volunteering at the same veterans housing project that had sustained me during my darkest days. I eventually built a new home, smaller than the villa, but no less thoughtfully designed. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and one that would always be available for Stephanie when she visited. We christened it with a small ceremony, pressing our handprints into the concrete of the back patio, alongside an impression of Margaret's favorite bracelet, a symbol of the family bonds that remained despite everything. The Andersons taught me that wealth without values is poverty of the worst kind. But they also, inadvertently, gave me back my fighting spirit when I needed it most. For that, at least, I can be grateful. Sometimes the most important houses we build aren't made of wood and stone, but of the boundaries we establish to protect ourselves while still leaving room for reconciliation and growth. That's the real legacy I hope to leave behind someday. Not property or possessions, but the wisdom to know what truly makes a house a home. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took advantage of you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story of reclaiming what's rightfully yours resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Remember, sometimes the biggest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to say no to those who would take what we've worked a lifetime to build.